"You don't need this car anymore, Dad." My son said it while standing beside my driveway with his hand already resting on the driver's door. I looked at him, then I looked at my car. A 1967 Ford Mustang dark green, original interior, manual transmission. My wife had called it the green one, because she never cared about car models. My father had bought it used when I was 29. It had been in our family for nearly 40 years, and now my son was standing beside it as if he had already decided it belonged to him. "I use it," Daniel smiled. "Not anymore." I frowned. "What does that mean?" He looked toward his wife, who was waiting in their SUV. "You barely drive now." "I drive 3 or 4 times a week to the grocery store and the hardware store." "Exactly." I folded my arms. "So, you should sell it." "I don't want to." He sighed. "Dad, what? You're 71. I know my age. You don't need a classic car sitting in your garage." I stared at him. "Why are you so interested in whether I need it?" He smiled. "Because it would be better with me." There it was. Not concern. Ownership. I walked toward the driver's side. Daniel followed. "Seriously, Dad, think about it." "No, you haven't even heard my offer." "I don't need to." 20,000. I laughed. "It's worth more than that, maybe." "It is. You haven't had it appraised in years." "I don't care what it's worth." He looked annoyed. "Then what do you care about?" I put my hand on the roof. "My father taught me to drive in this car." Daniel went quiet. "He took you to school in it?" "No. I thought Grandpa had a truck." "He did." Then, I looked at the Mustang. My first real trip with him was in this car. Daniel stared at it. "It's just a car." I shook my head. "No, it is." "No." I looked at my son. "It's a piece of my family." He rolled his eyes. "You always make everything sentimental." I smiled. "And you always make everything financial." He became quiet. Then he said, "Just give me the keys." I laughed. "No." His jaw tightened. "Why are you making this difficult?" "Because it's mine." Before he could answer, a black sedan pulled up behind us. A man in a gray jacket stepped out. He looked at the Mustang, then at me, then at Daniel. His expression changed immediately. "Where did you get that car?" I frowned. "My father gave it to me." The man took 2 steps forward. "Who is your father?" I pointed toward the house. "He's dead." The man shook his head. "No." He looked at the car again. "He died 12 years ago." I felt confused. "Yes." The man reached into his pocket and showed me a photograph. A younger version of my father stood beside a Mustang. The same car, same color, same unusual scratch on the rear fender. I stared at the photograph. My mouth went dry. The man looked at Daniel. "You were about to take this car." Daniel's face tightened. "Why?" The man didn't answer. He took out his phone. 5 minutes later, 2 police officers were standing in my driveway. And that was when my son discovered the sentence he had been so casually repeating all morning had one enormous problem. The car he thought I didn't need anymore was listed as stolen property. But there was something even stranger. It had been reported stolen 38 years earlier. And somehow, my father had legally bought it 3 years after the alleged theft. My name is Robert Miller. I was 33 when my father gave me the Mustang. By then, he had already become sick. He had worked as an auto mechanic most of his life. Cars were the language he understood best. He could hear an engine and tell you what was wrong. He could smell a fuel problem. He could look at an old transmission and tell you whether it had been repaired properly. The Mustang was one of his favorites. He bought it in 1970. At least, that's what he told me. He said a man had brought it into the repair shop because the engine was damaged. The man couldn't afford the repairs. My father bought the car. He rebuilt it. Then he stored it for years. When I turned 33, he handed me the keys. "You've earned it." I laughed. "I haven't done anything. You've worked hard. So take it." I asked him how much I owed him. He looked offended. "Your mother would slap me if I charged my own son." I kept the Mustang. I drove it for years. I took my wife Susan on our first road trip in it. We brought our children home from the hospital in it. I even drove Daniel to his high school graduation. There was something about that car that made ordinary days feel important. After Susan died, I stopped driving it often, but I kept it. Daniel knew how much it meant to me. At least I thought he did. Apparently, he only saw an old car taking up garage space. When he started asking whether I would sell it, I assumed he simply wanted a classic car. I hadn't considered anything else, not until the stranger arrived. The officers asked the stranger some questions. His name was Frank Harris. He was 75. He told me his father had owned the Mustang originally. I stared at him. "That isn't possible." Frank opened the photograph again. "My father bought this car new." "When?" 1967. I looked at the Mustang. The serial number, the unusual scratch, the interior, everything matched. "But my father bought it from a mechanic." Frank looked at me. Who? I gave him my father's name. Frank's face changed. He knew it. You're Earl Miller's son? Yes. He took a step closer. My father spent 20 years trying to find this car. I didn't know what to say. One officer asked, Mr. Harris, why was it reported stolen? Frank answered, my father's partner disappeared with it. I frowned. What partner? A man named William Carter. The name meant nothing to me. Frank continued. He stole several cars from a dealership. This was one of them. I shook my head. That can't be right. Why? My father bought this car legally. From whom? I don't know. Frank looked at the officers, then back at me. That's the problem. One officer asked for the vehicle identification number. I gave it to him. He entered it into the system. Then his expression changed. Mr. Miller, yes? This vehicle is still listed as stolen. I stared at him. Still? Yes. After 38 years, yes. I felt dizzy. I looked at Daniel. He was pale. The same son who had told me to give him the keys 5 minutes earlier was now staring at the car like it might explode. The officer continued. There is an active claim attached to the original owner. I looked at Frank. Are you the owner? He shook his head. My father died. Then who owns it? My sister and I. I looked at the Mustang, my father's car, my family's car, the car that had been in my garage for decades. Suddenly, none of us knew who had the legal right to it. And there was something else. The officer asked. Do you have any documents showing how your father acquired it? I swallowed. I think so. Where? At home. He nodded. Get them. I went inside. Daniel followed. The moment we reached the hallway, he whispered, Dad. I turned. What? Don't tell them everything. I stared at him. What? He looked terrified. Just give them the old title. I frowned. Why? He didn't answer. And suddenly I realized my son knew more about the car than he had ever told me. I kept old vehicle records in a metal box in the basement. Receipts, registration cards, insurance papers, repair invoices. I found the Mustang's old title. The document was dated 1973. Seller, William Carter. Buyer, Earl Miller. I stared at the signature, my father's name. Everything appeared legitimate. I carried the document upstairs. The officer examined it. Frank examined it. Nobody spoke. Then Frank said, That's my uncle's signature. I looked up. What? He was William Carter's brother. That doesn't make sense. Frank pointed to the title. My uncle died in 1969. Silence. I looked at the document again. The title was dated 1973. Frank's uncle had been dead for 4 years. The officer looked at me. Mr. Miller, where did this document come from? My father. Did he ever explain the purchase? Yes. What did he say? That the seller was a mechanic who couldn't afford repairs. The officer wrote something down. Then he asked, Did your father know the car might have been stolen? No. I answered immediately. My father would never knowingly buy stolen property. The officer nodded. But he didn't look convinced. Neither was I, because now the story was becoming stranger. My father had apparently bought a stolen car, using a title bearing the forged signature of a dead man. And he had kept the car for decades without ever realizing it. Or had he? I looked at the old title again. Then I saw something I had never noticed. The address of the seller. It was a repair shop, a shop my father used to work at. I looked at Daniel. He was still standing near the doorway. His face was tight. Did you know this? He looked away. I frowned. Daniel, he finally answered. I found something. What? Last month. What did you find? He hesitated, then reached into his pocket. He pulled out a photograph. It showed him standing beside the Mustang. On the back was a handwritten note. I read it. This car has a complicated history. Ask your father before you sell it. I looked at my son. Who gave you this? He didn't answer, and that was the moment I realized the car wasn't the only thing my son had been hiding from me. There was someone else involved. Someone who knew exactly where the Mustang came from, and they had warned Daniel. He just hadn't listened. 5. The person who warned my sonny looked at the note again. Ask your father before you sell it. Underneath those words was a name, Franklin Shaw. I knew him. Everyone in my father's old circle knew Franklin. He had owned a used car dealership less than a mile from my father's garage. He had also been one of my father's closest friends. But Franklin had died 19 years earlier. I looked at Daniel. He rubbed the back of his neck. Franklin's grandson gave it to me. Why? He contacted me after I mentioned the Mustang. I stared at him. You told someone you wanted to sell it. Yes. Who else? I'm not sure. Daniel. He sighed. I told a classic car dealer. I looked toward the officers. Which dealer? He gave me a name. The officer wrote it down. Then Frank stepped closer. Franklin Shaw? Yes. Frank's expression changed. I remember that name. How? My father used to talk about him. About the Mustang. Frank nodded. He said Franklin knew what happened. I felt a chill. Why didn't anybody tell me? Frank shook his head. I thought you knew. I looked at the old title. For 38 years. I had believed my father bought the Mustang honestly. Now it seemed possible he had known something. Not that the car was stolen, but that the paperwork was questionable. And perhaps that's why he never talked about where the car came from. The officer asked, "Can we speak privately with you, Mr. Miller?" I nodded. We stepped into the living room. He spoke quietly. "There is a possibility your father was an innocent purchaser." Meaning, he may have bought the vehicle without knowing it was stolen. And then, that doesn't automatically make the title valid. I understood the law didn't care what my father believed. It cared where the car came from. I looked back at the Mustang through the window. "So I may have to surrender it." The officer nodded. "Possibly." I felt something inside me drop, not because of the money, because of my father. He had given me that car. And now, after nearly 4 decades, I might have to hand it over to people who believed it belonged to them. Then Daniel spoke from the doorway. "Dad?" I looked at him. "What?" He swallowed. "I should tell you everything." I nodded. "I think you should." He sat down. And for the next 30 minutes my son told me how he had tried to sell my car. What he hadn't told me was that he'd known for weeks there might be a problem with the title, and there was one more thing he had done that I hadn't expected. He had already taken a deposit from a buyer. "You sold it already?" Daniel looked down. "Not officially." "What does that mean?" "I took a deposit." "How much?" $25,000. I stared at him. "Daniel, I was going to give it back. When the sale went through." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You accepted money for a car you didn't own." "I thought I could get the title cleared." "You knew there was a problem." "Yes." "Then why didn't you tell me?" He looked ashamed. "Because you would have said no." I laughed bitterly. "You finally got one thing right." He flinched. I continued. "You've spent weeks trying to sell something that belonged to me. I know. You found a warning. I know you took money. I know. And then you came here and told me I didn't need the car." He didn't answer. I shook my head. "What were you going to do with the money?" "Pay off a debt." What debt?" "A business loan." I stared at him. "Of course." The officer stepped forward. "Mr. Miller, I need copies of all communications concerning the attempted sale." Daniel looked at me. "Dad." I nodded. "Give him everything." Daniel took out his phone. He handed it over. The messages were clear. There were conversations with the classic car dealer, negotiations, photos, pricing, and one message that stopped me. It was from a buyer. "I don't care about the title issue. Get me the car and I'll pay the balance." I read it twice. Then I looked at the officer. "That sounds wrong." "It is." The officer copied the message. Then he looked at me. "I think we need to speak to the dealer." I nodded. But before he left, Frank said something. "There's another possibility." Everyone looked at him. "What?" "My father may have bought the car from someone who had no right to sell it." I nodded. "That seems obvious now." Frank shook his head. "No." He looked directly at me. "I mean something else." "What?" "My father kept records." I frowned. "Of what?" "Every car he ever owned." I stared at him. "Where?" "At his old house." "Does his family still have them?" "Yes." Frank hesitated. "My sister found a box of records last year." I felt my pulse quicken. "Did she find anything about my father?" "I don't know." Frank looked at the Mustang. "But she found the name Earl Miller." My father's name. And suddenly, the stolen car investigation became something else entirely. A search for the truth about my father. 2 days later, Frank invited me to his sister's house. She lived in an older neighborhood about 40 minutes away. We sat in her garage. She brought out a cardboard box. The lid was covered in dust. Frank told me this might help. I nodded. She opened it. Inside were old dealership ledgers, receipts, vehicle identification records, photographs. Everything had been kept carefully. Frank's sister handed me a folder. "Your father's name appears here." I opened it. There was an invoice dated 1973, the Mustang seller, William Carter. But beneath his name was a handwritten note. "Seller identity not verified." I stared at it. Why didn't the title show this? Frank's sister shook her head. "I don't know." I turned the page. Another note. "Vehicle believed to be part of unauthorized dealership transfer." My stomach tightened. I looked at Frank. So my father knew something was wrong. Maybe. Then why did he keep the car? He didn't answer. I kept reading. There was a letter timed, dated 6 months after my father bought the Mustang. I read it. My hands started shaking. The letter was from Franklin to my father. It said in simple terms that Franklin had discovered the vehicle was likely stolen. He urged my father to return it. At the bottom, my father's handwriting appeared. One sentence. I paid for it honestly. I won't abandon it based on a rumor. I closed my eyes. There it was, my father's decision. He hadn't been unaware. He had known there was a question, but he had believed the seller had acted legally. I felt conflicted, proud of him, and disappointed too. Frank looked at me. "What are you thinking?" I answered honestly. "I think my father made the same mistake my son just made." He frowned. "What mistake?" "Assuming that because someone gave him something, he had the right to keep it." The room went quiet. The difference was that my father had paid for it. My son had tried to sell it, but both decisions were built on incomplete information. I wasn't sure what the law would decide, but I knew what I would decide. I wouldn't lie about the car, not to the police, not to the family claiming it, not to my son. The investigation eventually identified the original owner. Frank's father's old dealership had records proving ownership. The car had been stolen from a transport lot in 1968. It had changed hands several times. My father bought it in 1973. The paperwork had been manipulated. He had paid for it honestly, but he had not obtained clear title. Legally, the situation was complicated. The police told me the car would likely be returned to the heirs of the original owner. I understood. It still hurt. I asked Frank to help me contact them. His sister did. The rightful heirs were two siblings. Frank's family knew them. We arranged a meeting. When they arrived, I had the Mustang parked outside. The older sister stood beside it. She touched the hood. "My father used to talk about this car." I nodded. "My father kept it for almost 40 years. She looked at me. "I know how? Because your father sent our family a letter." I stared at her. "What?" She handed me a copy. It was a letter from my father dated 1974. He explained that he had purchased the car without knowing about the theft. He said he was willing to cooperate if the true ownership could be established. I had never seen that letter. I looked at the signature, my father's. Then I understood why he kept the car. He hadn't ignored the issue. He had simply never found anyone with a legal claim strong enough to take it away. For decades, the family had searched. Then they stopped, until the VIN resurfaced. Because my son had tried to sell it. I looked at Daniel. He had gone pale. "If you hadn't tried to sell it," I said, "none of this would have happened." He nodded. "I know." The older sister looked at him. "You tried to sell our father's car?" Daniel lowered his eyes. "Yes." She looked disappointed, but not angry. "Why?" He didn't answer. I did. "Because he thought it was worth more than it was." She nodded. "That's a mistake many people make." She turned to me. "Will you fight us?" I looked at the Mustang, then shook my head. "No." She smiled sadly. "Thank you." The car was eventually returned to the original owner's family. I watched it leave my driveway on a transport truck. I stood beside Daniel. Neither of us spoke. After the truck disappeared, he said, "I thought you were going to hate me." I was angry. "I know, but I don't hate you." He looked at me. "Why not?" "Because you made a terrible decision." He nodded. "And because I love you." He looked down. "I don't deserve that." "No," I smiled. "None of us do." He laughed quietly. Then I looked at him. "Do you know what bothers me most?" "What?" "You didn't need the car." "I know. You needed money." "Yes. And you thought taking something from me would be easier than telling me you were in trouble." His eyes filled with tears. "Yes." I put my hand on his shoulder. "That is what you need to fix." He nodded. "I will." The Mustang was gone, but I had something else. The old letters, the photographs, the service records, the story. Those things remained. I asked the owner's family if I could keep copies of the documents. They agreed. We created a small archive. The Mustang eventually went into a private collection. But I received something I valued more. A complete record of my father's connection to the car. For the first time, I knew the whole story. He hadn't stolen it. He hadn't knowingly bought stolen property. He had made a judgment that turned out to be legally complicated. He had tried to contact the original family. He had kept the car because he believed he had paid honestly. He had even written down his reasoning. I wish I'd known that 30 years earlier. Maybe I would have asked him more questions. Maybe I would have understood why he always became quiet whenever someone asked where the Mustang came from. But life doesn't give us every answer while the people who know them are still alive. Sometimes we find the truth later. A week after the car was returned, the man who had planned to buy it came to my house. His name was Paul. He looked embarrassed. "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "I should never have offered your son money before the title was clear." I nodded. "How much did you pay?" $25,000. "Did you get it back?" "Yes." "Good." He hesitated. "I didn't know the car was stolen." "I believe you. But I knew something was wrong with the paperwork. That mattered. So why did you go ahead?" He looked ashamed. "I wanted the car." I nodded. There it is. He didn't argue. He left a few minutes later. I watched him walk to his truck, and I realized how close everyone had come to making the same mistake. Wanting something badly enough can make you ignore the warning signs. That was what happened to my son. And perhaps that was what happened to my father. The difference was what they did when the truth appeared. My father cooperated. My son tried to hide it. That was the part I needed him to understand. After everything was settled, I called Daniel into my study. He sat across from me. I've made a decision. He looked nervous. What kind? I'm not going to give you money to replace what you lost. He nodded. I understand, but I'm going to help you with your debt. He looked surprised. How? I'll lend you the amount. He stared at me. A loan? Yes. Why not just give it to me? Because I want you to repay it. He smiled faintly. That's fair. There will be a written agreement. Okay. You'll make monthly payments. I will. And if you can't make one, you tell me. He nodded. I looked at him. This isn't because you're my son. He looked confused. It's because I believe you can recover. He nodded. And because I don't want money to be the reason we stop talking. He smiled. I don't either. A year later, Daniel bought a used sedan. Nothing expensive, nothing flashy. When he showed it to me, I laughed. You actually did it. What? Bought a car you could afford. He smiled. I learned. Good. He looked at me. I almost missed the Mustang. So do I. What would you do if you got it back? I thought about it. I wouldn't. He frowned. Why? Because now I know it belonged to another family. He smiled. That sounds like something Grandpa would say. I think he would. We stood together in the driveway. Then Daniel asked, Can I help you with something? What? Anything. I looked at him. Come inside. What for? I have a box of your mother's things. He smiled. Okay. That simple invitation meant more than any car. I lost a car. I gained a story. I discovered that my father had carried a secret for decades. I discovered my son was capable of doing something reckless when he was desperate, and I discovered something about myself. I had always thought my job as a father was to protect my son, but protection doesn't mean hiding the consequences. It means standing beside someone while they face them. My son thought he needed my car to save his finances. He didn't. He needed honesty. He needed responsibility. He needed to admit when he was in trouble. The 5 minutes after he told me I didn't need the Mustang anymore changed everything. Within 5 minutes, he learned the car was stolen. Within weeks, he learned his father's history. Within months, he learned that his own decisions had consequences. And I learned something too. Things can carry enormous emotional value and still not legally belong to us. A family story doesn't override a property record. Love doesn't create ownership. And being someone's father doesn't mean giving them whatever they demand. My garage feels strange now. There's an empty space where the Mustang used to sit. Sometimes I catch myself looking at it. Then I remember the car is where it belongs, with the family who lost it. That doesn't make me angry. It makes me grateful. Because after 38 years, the truth finally caught up with everyone. And because of one reckless decision by my son, a decades-old question was finally answered. I still have my father's photographs, his letters, his tools, his old jacket, the things that truly belong to me. And more importantly, I still have my son. But our relationship is different, more honest. He doesn't ask what my possessions are worth. He asks how I'm doing. He doesn't assume I will solve his problems. He asks for advice. And when I say no, he accepts it. That's worth more than the Mustang. A few months ago, Daniel asked, Dad, do you think Grandpa would be angry with me? I smiled. Probably. He laughed. Seriously, yes. What would he say? I thought about my father. He'd tell you a car is a machine. Daniel nodded. And people matter more. He smiled. That sounds like him. I looked at my son. Do you know why your grandfather gave me that car? Because you loved it? No. He shook his head. Because he trusted me to take care of it. Daniel looked down. And I didn't. You didn't know the whole story. But I should have asked. Yes. He nodded. I understand now. That was enough, my son told me. You don't need this car anymore, Dad. He thought he was talking about an old Mustang. He wasn't. He was talking about my past, my memories, my independence, the things he thought I had outgrown. 5 minutes later, he discovered the car was stolen property. But the bigger discovery came afterward. He learned that something can be priceless to you and still belong to someone else. He learned that desperation doesn't make bad decisions good. He learned that hiding information doesn't make a problem disappear. And I learned that sometimes the best thing a parent can do is allow the truth to arrive without trying to soften it. I didn't have to punish him. The facts did that. The law did that. His own choices did that. My job was simply to stand beside him while he faced them. Today the garage is empty. But my house doesn't feel emptier, because my son visits. We have coffee, we talk, we argue, we laugh. And sometimes when we're quiet, I think about the Mustang, the car that belonged to my father, the car that carried my family for decades, the car that turned out not to be ours. So was the final lesson. We spend so much of our lives saying mine, my house, my car, my money, my business, my inheritance. But sometimes the most important things in life are not things we own. They're things we are trusted to care for. A car, a family, a memory, a relationship. For 38 years, I thought the Mustang was my inheritance. Now I understand. It was only borrowed time. And when the truth came, I let it go. My son once told me I didn't need that car anymore. He was right. Not because I was too old. Not because I couldn't drive. Because eventually I discovered something better than owning it. Knowing the truth. And keeping my son close enough to learn from it. If this story made you think about family property, inheritance, and the difference between ownership and responsibility, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever discovered that something your family treasured had a hidden history? And if you enjoyed the story, like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more emotional family stories about secrets, betrayal, consequences, and second chances.